Hello and welcome back to the NastyMetalProductions channel here at YouTube, and welcome to another Friday review. And for today's review, yes, that's right, the one that you've been waiting for me to finally give my thoughts on since it dropped on March 8th. That is Invincible Shield, the brand new 19th album for the metal gods themselves, Judas fucking Priest. Again, released on March 8th via both Epic Records and Columbia Records. So, without further ado, let's begin. Firepower, since its initial release, had received such great reception from its fans, including me, and critics alike. And 6 years later, it has already soared into classic status. With many of us, we had thoughts whether or not would it be possible for Judas Priest to top it. Given the age for some of the key members like Halford, Hill, and of course Tipton. And speaking of Tipton, it came with underwhelming news that he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And with all this, it came at no surprise that Andy Sneap, who had been working with Priest since Firepower, was chosen to tour full on with Priest. But again, that was at least for the tours. Whereas Glenn Tipton would still be involved with the studio writing and just not play a full set, but can be brought on to shows for certain songs or whatever, especially towards the end. And with all of this, it made everyone concerned about the state of Judas Priest. But here we are in 2024. Now, before I get into giving my thoughts on Invincible Shield, you know what I have to do. I have to do a track list rundown so I can tell you folks what are the songs that are on this album, how many tracks are on this album, and what is the time length for this album. Since this album technically consists a total of 11 tracks, it clocks in at the length of 52 minutes and 34 seconds. But since we were given a deluxe version of the album, to which includes 3 extra tracks again, these being for the European deluxe version and the Target exclusive, which was made here for the United States, these 3 tracks extends the length to 63 minutes and 48 seconds. So these tracks are, starting off with Panic Attack, then into The Serpent and the King, the title track, Devil in Disguise, Gates of Hell, Crown of Horns, As God Is My Witness, Trial by Fire, Escape from Reality, Sons of Thunder, Giants in the Sky, and that ends off what is pretty much the main album. And then finally it's getting to the 3 bonus tracks that are found on the European deluxe versions and the Target exclusive here in the United States. And these 3 tracks starts off with Fight of Your Life. Many thought that this was Fight for Your Life because of the track that was made as a bonus track for Killing Machine / Hellbent for Leather, which eventually got turned into being Rock Hard Ride Free for the Defenders of the Faith. But it is definitely Fight of Your Life, and it's a completely different track. Then into Vicious Circle, and then The Lodger. There it is. There's your tracks for Invincible Shield. Now, prior to the announcement of the album covers and including the title was leaked to the internet. I forgot what site it was, but it was definitely more like a European site. And many were kind of like, were scratching their heads going like, is this really the album title and is this the album cover? Many thought this was almost like a joke, that this was all AI and everything, that this couldn't be true. Well, when the band was obviously leaning the focus on that there would be an announcement that would be made at their performance at the Power Trip Festival, which would take place on October 7th when opening up for AC/DC, which, again, Judas Priest taking Ozzy Osbourne's place. When they did finally got to the moment where they announced the new album, that's when it became pretty much true that this was the album title and this was the album cover. Of course, this wasn't exactly the album cover, but the album cover that did get leaked ended up being used as like the Amazon exclusive cover, And again, it was sort of similar to this, but a bit like different color schemes and all that. Still, many were kind of a little bit disappointed because of, compared to a lot of the past other album covers from Judas Priest, this one kind of felt a bit like a way step back, and people were kind of afraid what the sound was going to be. But it's definitely a much different story, and so obviously coming off the heels of Firepower and me stating already how much of an impact Firepower made onto the fans and to everyone else, and the critics and me, does it live up to the hype? And is it as good, or if not maybe better than Firepower? Wait until you find out what I think. Now, this album clearly stays within the same confines of Firepower. However, it expands on that formula and in some ways takes it even further into different places. Now, it's not dipping its toes into the oceans of progressive metal structuring like Richie Faulkner had many believing in a first statement before he had to basically redirect it and elaborate more on those early statements. But what I feel this album does manage to do is go for a less simplistic approach to the song arrangements, and again, it tends to be a bit more varied within them. Like, for instance, is the title track with its twists and turns, or even The Serpent and the King, which also has some twists and turns within there, some riff changes, some tempos here and there, kind of getting ranged around differently to really make things more colorful. And then, of course, speaking of color, here we have Panic Attack, which is basically Frankenstein's monster of mashing in elements of both either Turbo Lover and Painkiller, but yet with Firepower's identity, and with a little bit of Electric Eye's drive. This track is also pretty damn colorful, and when this track had first dropped, as being the first lead single for the album, a lot of people were really taken back by the intro, which is very synth-based. And there's definitely some synth drum sort of sounds that are very 80s-like. And it kind of threw some people off, and many really made people believe that this would probably be a slight epic sort of version of like Turbo, which was a very poppy sort of album. So many were kind of led to believe that, but once you really got past the sort of intro, which it really isn't that sort of poppy in the intro, it's just very grandiose and very majestic, and it's very big and epic, which kind of uses as a way to really build up, and I think it really adds some atmosphere to the song, and it really kind of makes it pop, in my opinion. But either way, what we got was still a blazing metal track, and it's definitely one of my highlights off the album, that's for sure. But it's this approach to the album's song composing is what sets the standards for the remainder of the album. Now, one of my more favorite fascinating aspects for this album is how they infuse elements of their past into these songs, like, again, making the sound feel more nostalgic. Like, take, for example, what I was going on with, like, Panic Attack. But the thing is, everything doesn't sound like it's so full of itself. But again, it's just taking sort of certain parts from each of their eras to kind of really make something that is pretty dang cool, alright? But still, what I'm getting at, you have the rip roar of The Serpent and the King, which sort of has a familiar riff to Hellbent for Leather, but easily fuses it with the attack of Firepower. Then, of course, there are the more mid-tempo songs like Devil in Disguise and Gates of Hell, which channels 80s Priest. Devil in Disguise has that British Steel aura to it, with its Metal Gods-like groove or even Killing Machine-like groove, depending on which song jumps at you first when really listening to Devil in Disguise. But yet, it also feels like a more developed version of March of the Damned, taken off a Redeemer of Souls. Then, with Gates of Hell, besides having a beginning guitar lick that is sort of reminiscent of Down in Flames, another track taken off of Redeemer of Souls, yet thankfully it quickly goes into a track where I'm easily reminded of Rock Hard Ride Free. But it doesn't sound like a clone, it just uses elements from it to give this particular track that aura. And again, those killer dual guitar harmonies. Ugh, so good. Then there is As God Is My Witness, which basically is like a mishmash of Leather Rebel and Hard as Iron, but yet clearly has its own mystique to it. But then you have a track like Fight of Your Life, where there is a Killing Machine, or at times maybe a slight Stained Class or era or to it, but is really updated because the fact that this goes into wild directions that I thought wouldn't be possible for Judas Priest. Just taking a simple hard rock song structure and arrangement or whatever, and just transforming it into a blistering banger with some of the most insane and wild Scott Travis performances I've ever heard on an album. Now, my last biggest takeaways from the sound, besides the fact that I feel this album might be one of the most organic sounding Judas Priest albums since Killing Machine, or maybe British Steel, depending on which feels more comfortable with. One of the biggest sort of MVPs for the sound also is Richie Faulkner, and really well adapted into Judas Priest's sort of style, and he just feels more right at home, and he is really able to kind of allow himself to shine on this album and making this some of the most riveting guitar playing I think I've ever heard on a Judas Priest album, maybe since some of the ones much earlier. It really is a pretty awe-inspiring, and I think he just owns most of the sound in terms of a lot of the guitar playing, and there's some really good guitar playing on the sound, some really good riffs. Or let's even also bring up how fantastic Rob Halford sounds on this album. For a guy who is right now 72 years old, the fact that he still sounds like he might be in his 30s is unbelievable. I think compared to Firepower, this might be my favorite vocal performance from him in a long time. But besides that, there's also, in a way, I feel most of these songs, they have this grandiose quality to them, with the way that they're utilizing, again, the trademark dual guitar harmonies, or going for a more epic approach to the songs like the title track, Panic Attack, Gates of Hell, or in a cool case, the album closer, Giants in the Sky, a song about those who we have lost, which sort of reminds me of Children of the Sun, but it comes across more grand and majestic in its tone, or even the slight power ballad, Crown of Horns, which many have felt was maybe Christian in its tone for the lyrics, yet for some reason it sort of feels more vague in what it really is actually, you know. Still, it has that grandiose quality, it's melodic, yet it is all has this hard rocking drive and is a really cool song no matter what. But then on the other hand, we have also different feel songs, like some that don't really feel too melodic and don't really have much of that majestic quality and kind of go for more of the modern sound that Judas Priest have obviously developed since, well, the 90s, and Halford obviously adopting since the 90s. Songs like Escape from Reality, which feels very modern, and it's definitely not my favorite on the album, but it definitely as a grower. Then of course, then you have tracks like Trial by Fire and Sons of Thunder, and then of course Vicious Circle. All these are very cool tracks to begin with. Then Trial by Fire was one of the second single actually for the album. It's definitely a song that at first I didn't really quite care for, or I just wasn't feeling, but one that I'm really starting to like more and more. And then of course Sons of Thunder, which is a Glenn Tipton pen track. It is more of a short, sort of track. But then we have a track like The Lodger, which is again a Bobby Halligan Jr. penned song, who had obviously written songs for them in the past. It has really turned out to be one of the most uniquely brilliant songs for Judas Priest. Now, it's a short song, but it's a short song. It is very different for Judas Priest, and many have kind of threw out comparisons to either like Alice Cooper or King Diamond, especially with Rob Halford, who here and there when he actually, when he sings Vengeance is Mine, he definitely goes for like the very high falsettos, and it does kind of come across as very King Diamond-ish. But the one sort of comparison that really has stuck out with me with this song that can't leave my mind when listening to this track that I'm just reminded of is Blue Oyster Cult. It does feel at times like a Blue Oyster Cult track, like something that wouldn't be too out of place on like Agents of Fortune or Spectres, but it just has that sort of quality to it. It's real dark. It's real eerie, and it's got this story that has these twists and turns, especially about the person who they're obviously singing about, you know. It really has this sort of mystery tale to it, and it just feels also very characteristic of Blue Oyster Cult, and I just find that to be really fascinating. So that's all I gotta go on with that track. So yeah, The Lodger from Judas Priest. It definitely makes the Target exclusive or the European deluxe copies worth having, especially for the other 2 bonus tracks. So while there really isn't anything too progressive or outrageously complex, I think they found the fine balance for these elements, to where I feel that there is more going on within this album than compared to the straight-ahead approach of Firepower. So finally, what is my final verdict for Invincible Shield? I think this is a really good album from Judas Priest, and I don't know if I could go on and say that it might be the best since Painkiller or since Screamer for Vengeance, but it's almost damn near close, and that means, do I think it's better than Firepower? See, that's the part I'm torn with. This is definitely a damn good album, and I loved Firepower when that was released. And so I'm kind of torn because I've actually gave a lot more glowing sort of thoughts already about this album, and to the point where I think I might find some more things with this sound that I think might be more better than some of the stuff on Firepower in terms of the performances, and even just how everyone was able to kind of have more room to kind of play within the album. You know, the song just having just a lot more room, and I think that might be the big one here with the album. And so it really just comes down to that. So here, since you always would expect a rating from me, what is the rating, for Invincible Shield? I'm actually not going to give this album a rating, because I feel that if I give this a rating, then that means I'm kind of pigeonholing myself. I'm kind of putting me in a much more tougher spot, and just putting my backs against the wall. And therefore, since we're still not quite done with 2024, I feel it's just going to come down to how many times I'm still going to pull this album out, and how many times I'm going to reach for Invincible Shield, and how many times it's going to stay within my head. And so when it comes to more albums that I get around to listening to this year, and there's still plenty that I'm going to have to get to, and there's still a lot that I'm looking forward to, it just comes down to how many times this album is going to try and come into play with alongside those. So that's where I'm just kind of at right now. If I give it a rating, then that means I'm expecting that this album is going to be much higher or lower. Is this just going to be, for me, basing on how many times I've listened to the album? And so when it comes to the year-end lists, it's just going to come down to how many times I listen to it, and therefore I don't want to try and give it a rating yet. Still, I think what matters here is we have already gotten not just one very good album from Judas Priest, but now 2 really good albums from Judas Priest. And I think over the years to come, we're going to be talking about or debating what, the battles between Firepower and Invincible Shield the same way we probably would do like what's better, Sin After Sin, Stained Class, or maybe let's say Sad Wings of Destiny or Sin After Sin, or Stained Class and Killing Machine, or Screaming for Vengeance versus Defenders of the Faith, or Defenders of the Faith or Screaming for Vengeance versus Painkiller, and so on and so on. Just era after era after era with the band revamping their sound, and just always adapting to new stuff. And I think with Firepower, that really ushered in a new era, and I think this album pretty much is what it's supposed to do. It is going to expand on that, and it's going to pretty much, and again, I think we're in the final era for Judas Priest. There's no doubt about it. And for me, if this is going to be the final era, Firepower and Invincible Shield, you can't ask for anything else more. And with Rob Halford at his age, 72 years old, Ian Hill's like 73, Richie Faulkner's in his mid-40s, and Scott Travis is practically in his mid or late 60s. You really can't expect too much from them, but if this is what they're is still able to kind of put out, it's still really good, and you just have to enjoy it for what it is, and I think we'll just have to be happy. This is really cool. Firepower and Invincible Shield are obviously going to be the standards for what we're now to come to expect from the metal gods themselves, and you cannot take that for granted. We can't be taking Judas Priest for granted. Just have to be happy with what we're getting, and I think this is satisfying as it is. So for those who've at least listened to Invincible Shield, if you have any thoughts, whether they're either positive or negative, you can leave them all down in the comment section below. But if you're one of those who has yet to check out to Invincible Shield, and you might be hesitant, don't be hesitant. If you already had checked out Firepower and you loved what you heard, I can't see you being truly disappointed with this album, because it's about the same, but yet it doesn't feel like a clone. It is still has its own mystique, just like the same way Defenders of the Faith felt still different from Screaming for Vengeance. It's the same thing here. So I hope you end up enjoying it. So with that, this is Herbert Thrasher saying I'm out, and I'll see you all later. Take care, everyone.